Hello friends, I'm Michael Kingswood. It is story time. And it is Saturday, so it's time for Story Saturday. As always, we are reading through stories that I've written. And this year we are going through the stories that I did last year for my 52 Stories in 2023 project. This week we are doing the 8th story from Volume 1 of last year. It's called Watching Big Ben. Now, the whole point of this story was I was in a writing workshop to learn more about how to do time travel, and specifically time travel romance type stories. And this was one of the stories I wrote for that. It's not super romancy because it was kind of the first one I wrote and I was still getting in the groove. But it is time travel-y. So you're going to like it. You'll like it because I wrote it. And it's great because I wrote it. And I'm reading it. And so let's go have some fun. The car stopped and Megan looked out the front seat passenger window at a low, modern-looking two-story building set back from the road by a parking lot sized for 2 rows of vehicles, mostly empty at this hour. It didn't look like much, gray stone that was faintly illuminated by the sun, just peeking over the mountains to the east of San Diego's Sorrento Valley. Dark, vertically cut windows that made the building look like something almost from a weird dental picture, the way the windows evenly split the otherwise unbroken gray. Blue and silver lettering that was still illuminated by the nighttime lights behind the letters at the building's roofline read Replay Systems Incorporated. Nothing out of the ordinary in this place. It could have been any of 100 similar tech or biotech labs in the area, but looking at it sent a shiver of mixed excitement and apprehension up her spine. A black and yellow duffel bag, emblazoned with the Pittsburgh Steelers logo on the side, laid in her lap, and she flexed her fingers around the bag's handles, feeling the tension in her arms build and slowly release with each flexion. "You're crazy, you know that?" Kelly had driven her from her apartment in North Park and hadn't said a word the entire drive until now. Tearing her eye away from the fateful building, Megan gave her a smile that she hoped was cheerful despite the nerves that were building up within her. "You've said that a dozen times now." Kelly bobbed her head, and her blonde bangs swayed above her eyes in counterpoint. "Well, you are. You're going to hop into a time machine? Just to go back to watch Ben Roethlisberger win the Super Bowl in 2006? Megan didn't reply, just looked at her. They'd had this conversation before, but she knew Kelly wouldn't be happy unless she got to say her piece. Again. A game you watched on TV as a kid, and that you've rewatched at least 20 times since then. When I was 10. Whatever, you've seen the game, you know how it turns out. But I didn't get to go. Now I can." "But you could go anywhere, any when, and you're wasting it on this?" Megan shook her head. "The equipment is limited. It can't take you back more than 20 years. She shrugged. "Nothing else I want to see in that time frame." Kelly just stared at her for a second, then she snorted and threw up her hands. "I can't believe I'm letting you do this." Megan smiled again, with less effort than before as her friend's concern spread warmth through her that canceled out at least part of her nerves. She reached over and placed her hand on Kelly's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Don't worry, it's been well tested. I'll be fine." Kelly's yellow-brown eyes softened, and Megan saw the beginnings of extra moisture begin to well up for a second. Then she sniffed and placed her left hand atop Megan's and returned the squeeze. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Megan smiled more broadly now. "I will." Then she opened the car door and stepped out into the brisk chill of the early spring morning. Low 50s, practically Arctic cold to native San Diegans, but t-shirt weather in her hometown of Pittsburgh. She stood for a moment, breathing in the clear scent of the undisturbed morning air, hearing the call of some bird or other behind her and to the left. Then she looked back at her friend behind the steering wheel and gave a thumbs up. "I'll be back in about 30 minutes. She didn't wait to see Kelly's rolling eyes, just closed the car door, hefted the duffel bag, and stepped forward toward the building and her adventure into history. Ford Field in Detroit looked a lot different than the TV made it appear. Older, more run down, but maybe that was just her 2023 eyes. Even though she'd been alive in 2006, she hadn't fully anticipated the utter differences between what she was used to. No cell phones, or at least the ones people had were antiques. Clunky cameras, probably many were still film. That alone was almost like an alien landscape as she looked around the stadium during the game. Intellectually, she knew the iPhone hadn't even been invented in this time period, but still, seeing it. Or rather, not seeing most people hunched over their phones texting or reading or watching a video made her instinctively wonder what was wrong. Several times during the game, she found herself reaching for her phone, wanting to record something for her Instagram, only to find it wasn't there. She had, of course, left everything from her time back in the replay systems building. She'd only brought her Steelers garb and her terrible towel, which she'd brought in the duffel bag, and a winter coat. It felt like missing part of herself not having the phone with her, unnatural, but somehow also freeing. She found herself drawn into the game and into the emotions and dynamic of the crowd in a way that she couldn't remember experiencing from the game she'd gone to back in the future, because she'd put the phone and the screen between herself and actually experiencing. That thought came to her in the middle of the third quarter, and it left her slightly off kilter for the rest of the game. It wasn't a thing she had expected to consider at all. As the game drew to a close, she found herself more pensive than exuberant, despite the exultations of the Pittsburgh faithful all around her. She had made sure that her package with replay systems had included a ticket with them, and certainly that had made the game more fun, but now... The happy throng of the faithful filed out of the stadium, and she went with them, absorbing their energy and enjoying it, but not as much as she thought she would before she made the trip. She kept patting at her back pocket, kept feeling the insignificant weight of her phone not being there, and somehow kept feeling disjointed because of it. Her mind whirled as she walked along with the crowd, a kaleidoscope of thoughts and feelings sweeping past her. The happiness that she'd expected, to finally be here in the flesh and see this event that had mattered so much when she was a kid, that was there. It buoyed her, and she could see her father's smiling face as he watched his favorite team win, the way he had looked back when this event had first happened, before... She forced her thoughts away from that road, and the loss and heartache that it would inevitably lead to. So she just walked and followed the crowd, listening to the boisterous comments of the other Steelers fans around her and enjoying the moment. At some point she found herself in a sports bar, a few blocks from the stadium. It was a mixed crowd. Lots of Steelers fans, all smiles. A bunch of Seahawk fans, less obviously happy, since their team had lost, but still seemingly enjoying being there. And the rest, just general football fans who had come along for the Super Bowl ride, because football. Megan managed to squirm between two groups of Steelers fans, who were each engaged in their own boisterous conversations, and found a gap at the bar between a guy in a Seahawks jersey and a woman in, of all things, a business suit. The bartenders were swamped, but Megan had found over the years that her curly black hair and sharp green-blue eyes helped her stand out in the crowd, and sure enough, in moments, one of the male bartenders, of course, took her order and spun to face the taps behind the bar to fill it. Yingling, of course. Gotta celebrate a Pennsylvania victory with a Pennsylvania beer. The guy brought it back, and she paid with some of the currency replay systems had given her. It wasn't counterfeit. They had apparently scoured banks and who knows where else to get the real bills that would work in this time. Wouldn't do to slip a $20 into a business in 2006, right? Then again, Megan considered she didn't know for sure it wasn't counterfeit. How would she be able to tell, and what consequences would there be to anyone, even the business, if it was? Not like the feds could prosecute them based on payments made 17 years before her trip if they ever found out about it. Another train of thought she hadn't considered until she made the trip, and Megan found she was frowning as she took a sip from her beer. You don't look so happy for a girl whose team just won. She gave a little jerk and looked to her left, and found the guy in the Seahawks jersey was looking at her with a raised eyebrow. He was tall but not dark, brown hair instead of black, but he was handsome, she had to give him that, and he filled out that jersey nicely. She swallowed and shook her head quickly. Just had a weird thought is all. He cocked his head to the side slightly. Care to share? Megan took a closer look at him. His smile was broad, friendly, and his eyes sparkled, reflecting the illumination from the big TVs behind the bar and above the taps, so that he looked genuinely interested. Interested in getting into her pants, anyway. She glanced down at the watch replay systems had given for her to wear. It showed local time, of course, but at the bottom it also showed how long she had until the recall signal would transmit, and she'd be yanked back home to the bright and glorious future that she had left a few hours ago. Just now, in that time. 10 minutes left, and she found herself frowning again. Such a short time. I was just thinking how much my dad would have loved this, being here. She shocked herself by saying that. She hadn't intended to, though it was true. Dad would have loved this. But she hadn't even been thinking that. Had she? He couldn't make the trip, the guy asked, and he took a sip from his bottle of Bud Light. She shook her head again. No, he's dead. Died when I was 12. He blinked and lowered his bottle down onto the bar, his smile slipping. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" Megan waved off his statement. "It's all good. He's been gone a long time, and—" It struck her then that her dad wasn't dead. Not now in this time, not here. She had come back to see the football game, the game he'd loved, to the night that had given him the most happiness she'd seen in him all the time from this night to the day he died of cancer a year and a half from now. She'd come back and hadn't even thought to come see him, to talk to him even for a moment. Right now he was in Pittsburgh tucking her girlhood self into bed, and then he and Mom were going to go maybe have another beer, or maybe make love. And here she was in a place he never got to go, so completely self-absorbed that she hadn't even considered maybe seeing him, and not the game. But see him how, the voice in her head said, the logical part that had seen Back to the Future and knew the danger inherent in making contact with family while back in time. All the same, she hadn't even bothered, hadn't even considered it. Her vision was becoming blurred from tears, she realized, and she flushed with embarrassment. Megan looked away from the man and took a long, deep draw from her glass. She willed him to look away, go elsewhere. Since the tears were still welling, she could feel that her cheeks were wet now. "Doesn't look like it's all good to me," he said. Megan took a long breath and shook her head. "It's just—" She looked down into her beer, struggling to put her thoughts and feelings together again. She saw her father's face, so joyful that night. He loved the Steelers. Seeing them win, it was the greatest thing for him. He used to tell me about the glory days back in the 70s, but I didn't understand it. I was just a little girl. But when we watched Big Ben win together, I saw his face and—" She sniffed, then took another drink. "I just wanted to feel that way again." Silence from the guy to her left, but she was in her own zone now. "We'd talked about going to the big game someday, but he died right before Ben won it again, and—" Her voice broke and she felt the tears flowing freely now. More silence from beside her. It took her a moment to get herself back together, wipe her eyes. When she finally looked back up to the guy, she put on as much of a smile as she could. "I guess that sounds—" The look on his face stopped her words in their tracks. His eyes were narrow, his lips compressed into a deadly, serious expression. "When did he die?" "October 2007. Why—" And she stopped, her mind going completely blank, with shocked understanding as adrenaline flooded through her system. "Oh shit," she said silently. "What has she done?" The man nodded slowly. He set his Bud Light down on the bar with his left hand, and with his right he reached into the thigh pocket of the cargo pants he was wearing. He withdrew a black rectangular object and held it out in front of her. "Do you know what this is?" Megan blinked and felt her mouth drop open. "An iPhone? What the—" He shook his head. "No, it's a Samsung Galaxy S10. His eyes narrowed into squints. "Where are you from?" "When?" Megan swallowed, unsure how to proceed. Clearly this man was not from here and now either. But how? Why? "Silly question," the voice in her head said again. "You're here. Others will be too." Mechanically, as though her jaw and vocal cords were acting of their own accord, she heard herself say, "San Diego, March 2023. The man nodded, then he grinned broadly. "So it really does work." He sounded triumphant, but also relieved, like a weight of worry had fallen from his shoulders. "What do you mean? You're here from—" "San Jose, January 2019. I'm the CEO of a startup. I wanted to be the first to try our equipment. It's my baby, so I should take the risk." "Replay systems?" His eyebrows rose high onto his head and he nodded. "Thomas Schultz," he said, and held out his hand to her. Megan couldn't believe this was happening. Numbly, she shook his hand and found he had a firm but not overpowering grip. Megan, the alarm beeping from her watch, cut her off, and she looked down to see the return timer counting backward from 30 seconds. Thomas seemed to understand what was happening immediately, and he took her by the arm. Pulling her firmly, he led her to the rear of the bar, where a side corridor turned right toward the bathrooms. "I want to talk to you again, Megan. Look for me when you get back." They reached the side corridor just as the alarm sounded again. He hustled her around the corner, and then the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of color. When the swirls of colors subsided, Megan blinked and took a step forward. She was back in the transport room, as the replay system's staff called it. The room was about 20 feet on a side and painted white on the walls and ceiling. It was sparsely furnished for its size, just a black table with 4 chairs near the wall across from her and a pair of computer desks off to the right. Behind her stood equipment racks that supported the transport, and she stood on a black pad that was raised off the floor by about 3 inches. That was it. As she stepped off the pad, the staff member who had escorted her in stepped forward to meet her. The staffer was an older Korean woman, Susie, in a navy blue skirt and white blouse that was unbuttoned at the collar. She had her hair tied back in a ponytail and wore square, black-rimmed glasses. She had been standing next to the table, clipboard clasped in both hands. The same place she had been standing when the technicians at the computer desk initiated the transport process, 6 hours ago from Megan's point of view. Maybe a second or two from Susie's. Susie reached Megan's side and smiled with professional kindness. "How do you feel?" Megan shook her head. "Fine, I guess." She sniffed and realized her nose was still a little bit runny from her earlier crying. "It worked." Susie nodded. "Now, there may be some disorientation over the next few hours. That is normal, but if it lasts more than the door off to the left, the room's only entrance, opened, and a man stepped in. He was in a charcoal gray business suit and had lines on his face that he hadn't had in the sports bar, and there was a hint of gray in the hair on his temples. But Megan immediately recognized Thomas Schultz. His eyes locked onto her as he strode across the room, toward her and Susie. For her part, Susie's eyes bugged out. "Mr. Schultz?" she said in obvious surprise. "Thank you, Susie," he said, not taking his eyes off of Megan's as he came to a halt in front of her. "I'll take Miss Caldwell from here." Megan felt herself flushing under the intensity of his stare. Susan nodded and stepped back, then set her clipboard on the table and turned to exit the room. "Hello, Megan," Thomas said, and the same twinkle in his eyes from the sports bar returned. "It's good to see you again. You too, I guess, but to you, we only just parted company. Well, for me, it's been 4 years." He smiled then. "I've been looking forward to this for that whole time." She had no response to that. He swept his arm out toward the door. "Shall we get a cup of coffee and talk?" Megan found herself nodding. Why not? He nodded as well in satisfaction. He opened the door and held it open for her, and she stepped through. Okay, there you are, watching Big Ben. Obviously, Big Ben Roethlisberger, right? So, I served on the USS Pittsburgh, and when I was on board that ship, we got to go to Pittsburgh for the Navy birthday weekend. The city, every city that has a ship named after it, has a committee where they do, like, taking care of the ship's crew kind of stuff, and so they send stuff, gifts to the ship from time to time, and they put on events, and they flew a bunch of us out and had a Navy birthday ball and got to tour around Heinz Field and some other places around town. Got to explore Pittsburgh. Never been to Pittsburgh before then, and it's like, man, this is a good town. I liked it, and it was a cool experience. So when it came time to write this story, one of the conceits, that restrictions that was placed on us, was it couldn't go further back in time than 20 years, and I was on the boat at the time when Big Ben won that Super Bowl, and we watched the Super Bowl, and the Steelers won, and it was like, well, that was the coolest thing ever, yay, because we're on the Pittsburgh, yay, and it was, it's a good time. So that's the reason I selected that as the subject of the time travel. Everything else that came out with Megan and Tom and all the rest, that just flew from there. But fun little story, I liked it, hopefully you did too. What else is going on in the writing world? Well, the Kickstarter campaign for Bard's Song, Glimmervale 7, is done. I've been bothering you about it for 3 weeks. We finished up this week and exceeded the goal, got about 50% higher than the initial goal, so that's good. Unfortunately, we came just below hitting a stretch goal, so oops. Oh well. But it's still good, and so that is going to be coming out here shortly. That's going to be the focus, my main focus as far as writing goes for the next, umpteen weeks. No, kidding. I promised the Kickstarter would get out by September. Probably be out to everybody sooner than that. Just a matter of, doing the final production and then post-production stuff to get it there. But plenty of time. I gave myself a buffer so as not to overpromise and underdeliver, but do the other way. So that'll be good. Further on after that, we'll be going to the next book of the year, which is going to be, I'm finally going to finish that sci-fi space navy book I've been working on for a number of years. And we'll be finished as soon as Glimmervale 7 squared away. We'll turn our attention fully back to that, and we'll be doing a Kickstarter campaign for that later on, probably late summer. And then I got some more plans for after that, obviously. Other things, I'll be going to Chattanooga here in about 3 weeks. Going to LibertyCon in Chattanooga at the last weekend, last weekend, third weekend in June. And don't go to conventions very much, because that'll be fun. And here, we are going to be continuing, of course, with Story Saturday. Next weekend Story Saturday is another story that came out of that same workshop that Big Ben came from. It's a story called Eyes of Gold. This time, the time traveler goes all the way back to ancient Greece, with all kinds of fun shenanigans from there. So come by next Saturday for that. That will be awesome. The thing you need to do between now and then, though, is if you like these stories, and I know you do, go buy some books. MichaelKingswood.com/store will get you to the best store, the store that I run, the store that gives me the most profit. But if you like all those middlemen, you can go to michaelkingswood.com/books to read, the number 2. That'll get you to the Universal Book Link aggregator, where you can pick the title and it'll click up and you can pick which store from there. So, store of your choice. If it's not my store, I'll live. Other things you need to do to support. We got a subscribe star page, subscribe.com/michaelkingswood. Yeah. Not a lot of activity on there because we just set it up. I like to get some activity on there. So if you don't want to buy books, but you like hearing stories read, and you like the other things I do on these channels, and you want to show a little support, go over there. A couple bucks a month. Help a brother out. Keep the lights on, among other things. That'll be awesome. And, depending on what you select, you get a story or two per week or per month or per year or whatever. And then finally, make sure that if you're subscribe to the podcast or the YouTube or Rumble channel or whatever channel you're on, tell all your friends, and come back next week. Until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do.